Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of MRTC Talks. My name is Paul, one of the counselors here. Today's topic, how to forgive yourself. I think one of the most difficult issues that many guys coming into treatment have to face during their time here is that as they sober up, the true enormity of the damage that may have been caused by their addiction begins to sink in. As we stop numbing ourselves and anesthetizing ourselves every night or every day, we begin to recognize the true damage and the true hurt that may have been caused others in connection with our addiction. Often men began to see the true carnage in the aftermath of their drinking and using, the family members who have been hurt, the relationships that have been destroyed, the crimes that have been committed, the hurt that has been inflicted. And oftentimes, one of the most difficult things in early recovery is coming to terms with and stock of all of that. All of the damage that may have been caused in the connection with our addictions may result in tremendous feelings of guilt and remorse and regret and shame. And those obviously are difficult feelings to go through, to be sure, but they'd also sometimes make it harder to recover. Because if we are so filled with self-recrimination and guilt, obviously we may be tempted to drink or use drugs, or it may otherwise dissuade us in our attempts to get better and heal ourselves from the addiction that caused all of that hurt in the first place. And so today what I'd like to do is to offer you a few ideas for how you may begin to work on the important task of forgiving yourself. I want to stress that arriving at self-forgiveness is obviously a process. I don't mean to suggest that you could watch a 10-minute video and at the end of that be all hunky-dory with everything that you've done. Forgiveness, like most things in life, is something that it's arrived at over time, is arrived at through actions, and ultimately, right, is something that takes a while. But I hope that these ideas give you a place to start, something to begin to think about as you work on the important work of coming to terms with and forgiving yourself for acts that you've committed in connection with your addiction. The first idea that I would raise with you is the idea that you are not alone. That every man that is in treatment at MRTC and every other treatment center is struggling with some of the same feelings of guilt and remorse that you are. If you are watching this in a group right now, one of the things that I would encourage you and your counselor to do is maybe an exercise that might help to illuminate this. And that is to simply go around and have everyone in the group share what is one thing that they did in connection with their addiction that they have the most difficulty forgiving themselves for. What is the one act, one memory, one experience that comes up in your minds that you simply cannot forgive yourself for? That when you think of it, it repulses you, it makes you filled with disgust and loathing. If you could, in your group, to hear something from everyone, I wonder if that would be healing. I think it would be. Obviously, if you did that in a group setting, all of you in the group would need to make a recommitment to the confidentiality of your group, because my guess is if you do it right, many people would share things, some of which they may have never told another human being before. But even if that's not the case, that you're not in a group where you can do that, I would encourage you as you go through your time at MRTC to perhaps in your conversations with others, broach that topic with them. Tell them you may need to take a risk first and to reveal to them how you may be struggling to cope with forgiving yourself, and that there are actions that you've committed that you think are unforgivable. And you may have to share some of those with them to encourage them to share with you likewise some of the actions that they have the greatest time coming back from, for which they may feel there is no coming back from, and that they are struggling to forgive themselves for. I think if you have conversations like that, either in group or individually, you will come to realize that you are not alone, that all of us are struggling to forgive ourselves from these actions, and that there is some comfort in knowing that you are not unique. The second idea that I would give for you to consider is this, and that is the fact that you may feel so badly about the acts that you've committed in connection with your addiction that hurt other people is itself evidence of some basic underlying goodness. Let me repeat that. The fact that you feel so badly about the hurt that you inflicted in connection with your addiction is itself evidence of a basic underlying goodness. If you were a sociopath, you would not feel any remorse or regret for the actions that you've committed. But the fact that you would even be watching this video, the fact that you would even be thinking about how can I forgive myself for all the hurt and pain that I've caused is itself an indication that you are at base level a good man, that you have morals and values, and that for whatever reason you have acted in contravention of those which you now need help to recover from. The third idea that may help you to arrive at some measure of self-forgiveness is to contemplate this. Would you have done the actions that you are struggling to forgive yourself for were it not for the influence of drugs or alcohol? In other words, had you not been in the grips of your addiction, would you have taken the actions that you are finding yourself hard to forgive yourself for? Would you have let your children down? Would you have cheated on your wife? Would you have committed a crime? Would you have stolen from other people? Would you have betrayed the trust of other people had it not been for the fact that you were under the influence or in the grips of your addiction? If the answer to that question is no, which I suspect for many of you it will be, then I think it's a fair question to ask. Are the actions that you committed a product of your own personality and morals, or are they a consequence of your addiction? Is it the drugs and alcohol, or is it you? I think if you answer that question honestly, you will see that many of the acts that you have maybe the most difficult time forgiving yourself for are not things that come out of you, because you would never in a million years contemplate doing them right now when you're sober. They were as the result of your addiction and the different state that addiction put you in that required you sometimes to do desperate things to protect yourself, but which had the effect of hurting others. The fourth idea that I encourage you to think about is this. There is an old line in addiction treatment that says, hurt people, hurt people. And even though right now you may be very focused, understandably, on the hurt that you have caused others, I invite you to consider whether that hurt may itself be related to hurt that had been inflicted on you, that you had been the victim of, that you had suffered from, that may have occurred long before, decades before, the hurt that you may have inflicted in connection with your addiction. In fact, many people believe that addiction is itself a response to pain. Ask yourself, why would it be, as Dr. Gabor Mate says in his brilliant video, Addiction and Brain Development, why would it be that a guy would turn to drugs and alcohol in the first place? And why would he continue to use it despite the fact that it destroys his life, it destroys his relationships, it destroys his health, it destroys everything he holds dear? Well, as Dr. Mate says in there, right, there must be something very powerful, very essential, very important that the drugs do for him. Otherwise, he wouldn't continue to use it. Well, what could that be? As Dr. Mate says, right, maybe we can discern the answer to that by looking at what the essential nature is of drugs in the first place. And so using the example of opiates, he asks, what is the medical use of opiates? The answer to that question is that they are painkillers. When you go to the hospital and have a knee replacement or a hip replacement or some kind of surgery, you are given an opiate, morphine, for example, because it is essentially a painkiller. But as Dr. Mate also goes on to point out, the interesting thing is that opiates, like all drugs of abuse, work not just on physical pain, but on psychological and emotional pain. And that may have been the reason why you turned to drugs and alcohol in the first place. As Dr. Mate says in his line, for which he is known across the world, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. And so as you contemplate the pain that you may have caused other people, I invite you to consider whether some of that pain may be as a result of your addiction and the fact that you turned to drugs and alcohol because you yourself were in pain. And maybe some of that pain may relate to things that occurred a long time ago, prior to the time that you implemented any pain on anyone else. Maybe it was a consequence of childhood neglect or abandonment or abuse. or trauma. This is not meant to justify any pain that you may have caused or to excuse it or to minimize it. I get that. But what this is meant to do is to help you to understand that maybe the pain that you caused is not because you are a bad person, but because you are a hurt person. Hurt people hurt people. People often do to others what's been done to them. I invite you to consider that as a way of helping you to achieve a greater measure over time of self-forgiveness. The next idea is a simple one, but a profound one, and that is that to where you can, to make amends. To think of the people that you have hurt in your life, and to the extent that it is possible, to try to rectify that to the greatest extent you can. Through talking to them, through telling them how you feel, through apologizing, through providing restitution, through doing whatever action you can do to try to make good the hurt that you might have initially caused. A few things about that. If you do something like that, I encourage you to not be attached to the outcome. We, every morning at MRTC, as you know, we say some wise words that I think we often just repeat rotely without considering the true wisdom of them, the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. When it comes to making amends to people that we may have hurt, what we have control over is what we do, what we say, what we try to rectify. What we do not have control over and what we need to accept is to what their response may be. And one of the important things to recognize is that forgiveness of other people for us doesn't come necessarily automatically every time we simply make an amends. Our families and our friends and our acquaintances, right, forgiveness of us may take longer than we might hope. It may be on a different timetable than our choosing. And it may be less based upon our words and much more based upon our actions, particularly our actions after MRTC. One of the things that's interesting to think about is that there is research that shows how easy it is to destroy trust in a relationship and how hard it is to regain that after that trust has been broken. Do you know, for example, that research has shown that for every one lie that is told in the context of a relationship, it takes approximately 21 subsequent truths for a person to regain the sense of trust that is lost through one falsehood. Can you imagine that? 21 truths to make up for one lie. And so I encourage you not to necessarily believe or expect that simply by making amends to people while you are in treatment, that will be sufficient to rectify any harm that you may feel like you might have done. It will be a start. And recognize that the real proof in the pudding will likely, in the people that you've hurt, they will occur after you leave treatment, not during the time that you're here. Deeds, not words, are often most important, but words can be a start. The other thing I would like to say about making amends is that it may be the case that some of the people that you have hurt are no longer around. They may have passed away. They may be physically distant. You may not even know who the identity of the people are that you may have hurt. How do you make amends to that? Well, one idea is that even though they may not be around, you can still make amends that might heal you in a certain way by apologizing, but not to them, but by apologizing in the presence of some compassionate witnesses who can hear your words of apology and acknowledge them. Who am I talking about? I might be talking about people in your group. One of the things that you could do is to write a letter. If there's someone that you need to apologize for, to make amends for, to atone with, to write a letter saying to them what you need to say. And even though it may not be possible to read that letter to them or to send that letter to them, those words can still be heard and witnessed by reading them to your group. Having our words of forgiveness witnessed by other people compassionately and gently can be a simple step towards helping us to achieve some greater measure of self-forgiveness. The next idea that I would offer you is to recognize that sometimes, again, because people that we may have harmed are not present, we may not be able to pay it back to them, but we can always pay it forward. The idea is that everything that you do from here on out in your life, every good, kind, decent, compassionate, honorable act that you commit is in some way, existentially, a payback for any harm that you might have committed in your life. And so I encourage you to think about that in big ways and in small, in formal ways and in informal ways. If you volunteer, if you do service work, if you get involved in charity, everything you do going forward is a way of paying back in a certain spiritual sense, I believe, any harm that you might have caused. And even if you don't get involved in those formal ways to give, any decent act that you commit in your life, any friendship that you accord, any kind word that you bestow, any attaboy that you give, any listening to someone in suffering that you participate in is a kind act that helps in some way to rectify the harm that you might have caused. And then the last idea that I want to give you today is something that my own therapist told me when I was struggling with issues of remorse and regret. It is a powerful statement that I think may hopefully give you some greater peace like it gave me. He simply told me this. He said, Paul, the greatest antidote to regret about the past is a well-lived present. Let me repeat that. The greatest antidote to regret about the past is a well-lived present. And what I think he meant by that is that there is something, when we are feeling like we are living our present in accordance with our highest aspirations, our highest ideals, our highest morals, that we are making good use of the present, somehow, magically, all of those regrets about the past somehow seem to dissipate. So I invite you to think about those ideas as a way to help yourself to get to a greater measure of self-forgiveness, realizing that, again, it is not something that is immediately attained simply by watching a video, but is something that is obtained by practice and reflection and action. And through all of that, I hope that you will treat yourself compassionately and gently, recognizing that you, like all of us, are human beings, fragile, fallible, flawed human beings, susceptible of making mistakes, with shortcomings and difficulties that we all have. Release yourself from the idea of being perfect and work on becoming good enough. My guess is you already are. And by taking further actions to get to a point of forgiveness for yourself, you hopefully will be doing one of the most important things you can do to be able to not only stay sober, but to make the most of your potential and of your life. Hope that's helpful, guys. See you next time.